don't want access to the tree of life on gospel terms. They want access to the tree of life on their own terms. They want to sneeble their way back into the garden.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome to And If Love Remains. I am your host, Mike Lovett, and I have a very special guest with us today, Pastor Douglas Wilson. Doug is an author. He's a pastor. He's a scholar. He runs. He's part of two YouTube channels that I really enjoy, Blog and Mayblog, and Canon Press. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I really encourage people to go check those out on YouTube. He's very insightful on events that are happening today, and I've really appreciated the work that he's doing. Where else can people find you, Doug, if they like what they hear today?
If the best place as a clearinghouse would be my blog, dougwills.com. If they go there, they can pretty much get to anything I do. Okay.
Very good. And we're going to talk today about a book, and this comes, I saw a lecture that you gave several years ago. I think it was at Trinity College. I can't remember now. Where you discussed the Ransom trilogy by C.S. Lewis. And I was so impressed and thrilled to have you on to talk about specifically the third book in the trilogy, That Hideous Strength. Talk to us a little bit about just kind of your C.S. Lewis, his influence on you, like maybe a little origin story regarding C.S. Lewis and Doug Wilson.
Sure. So I'm an old guy. I was born in 1953. And my dad started reading C.S. Lewis Narnia stories to us when I was 5. So that would have been 58. And so that was when the books were still fresh, still new. So I've sort of I grew up in Narnia, grew up on Narnia, and just loved what I took in from that growing up. And then when I was in high school, I started reading some of Lewis's other stuff. And I don't remember when I first read the Ransom trilogy, but That Hideous Strength particularly made a real conquest of me. It's the kind of book that I have read. Lewis himself, in his book Experiment and Criticism, says that you measure a book by how many times a reader returns to it, how many times they reread it. And by that measure, That Hideous Strength is one of my top books. I've read it probably 14 or 15 times. And it's the sort of book where if I go for a while without having read it, I need to read it again.
Yeah. It's funny. And if you're not really, if you don't know a lot, I mean, I think most people know the Narnia series. I think they know some of his apologetic works and things. But if you're a casual Lewis fan, the Ransom trilogy, I know for me that's one that came to me later, and right. And it's something that man, it's such wonderful writing, and there's so much to it. Was that some of his earliest writing? Is that right?
Well, he wrote That Hideous Strength during the Second World War. So It was in the early 40s, probably 43 or thereabouts. And that was right around the same time that he delivered the lectures that became his book, The Abolition of Man. And The Abolition of Man and That Hideous Strength were produced right around the same time. And he says in the preface of That Hideous Strength that he was making the same basic point that he was making in both books. So these issues were on his mind, shall we say?
Yeah.
And so he wrote his first Christian book, The Pilgrim's Regress, in the 30s, So this was, and he died in 1963. So probably in the first third of his Christian writing career.
Okay. Okay. You know, let's talk about the book in context of the Ransom trilogy, just to again give people some context.
Sure.
They it's different than the other two books, and I think about this as I was going through it again, getting ready for our chat. You know, it's so different. It almost feels like he may have, you know, written that first and then added the other two to give background. I mean, it's like the book in the series, what the series was meant to be written for, and yet, yeah, I'm curious what you know about that or what you think about that.
Sure. It chronologically, it happened the other way. He wrote that Out of the Silent Planet, which is a sort of a traditional science fiction book from that era by a Christian. He wrote that first, where Ransom, the lead protagonist, is abducted and taken to Mars. And then his second book, Perelandra, occurs on Venus, which is the temptation of the first couple there on Venus. And when you get to the third book, which occurs here on Earth, there's a radical atmospheric shift, right?
Right.
It's just very, very different, and I think it's different for more than one reason. With Malacandra and Perelandra, with Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, the worlds or the races there are unfallen. You're not dealing with sin, really. You're dealing with the temptation to sin on Perelandra, but they're not fallen worlds. When you get to this world, our world is very much fallen, very much broken, all messed up, right? And that's one major tone shift. Each planet is under the influence of an Oyarsa, an angelic power, and Malacandra and Perelandra, those angelic powers are wonderful and unfallen. The Oyarsa over our planet is the devil, basically, and that contributes to the darkness of the book. And then there's another element that comes in that's very different, and that's the result of the influence of a man named Charles Williams. So Charles Williams was an editor for Oxford University Press, and he worked in London. And during the Second World War, because of the bombing, Charles Williams was moved out to Oxford to get away from the bombing so he could do his work there. And when he moved to Oxford, he there met Lewis and had a profound influence on Lewis. So all the Arthurian stuff, Merlin, all of that is the influence of Charles Williams, who was very much into that. And that element wasn't really Tolkien's. Tolkien was a good friend of Lewis, and the Merlin stuff, Arthurian stuff, was not really Tolkien's cup of tea, because for someone like Tolkien, that was way too recent, almost modern time. Yeah, almost modern times.
Right.
But Arthur and that whole thing is a major key plot element in that Hideous Strength, and that was all the contribution of Charles Williams, who was there because of the bombing in London, because of the war.
Interesting. That's wild. And that whole, it's funny, that whole aspect of the book. Doesn't he say that it gives it that fairy tale quality that he kind of talks about making a modern, adult fairy tale. And kind of takes us into that otherworldly place.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
So he takes us back to the age of Merlin, but he takes us back to the age of Merlin and also the cosmology that was extant during that time. So right. that's what gives it its ethereal otherworldliness.
Which is really interesting. I had a little while back, I had Professor Michael Ward on, and we talked about his book and the Seven Heavens and Narnia, and that idea of bringing in that cosmology and that whole idea of how ancient people saw their place in the world and saw even the Earth's place in this fallen Christian world, how that applies to this mid 20th century Edgewood or Edgestone. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this book is for some reason I put this somewhat in the same category as kind of the dystopians, 1984, A Brave New World, but it's I almost think of it as we have in libraries there's a section of historical fiction, and I think of this as almost like futuristic fiction or prophetic fiction or something like that, and I think of that Hideous Strength in that same kind of realm, but it's more like where those books take place, years or centuries or some time after the dystopian change happens. This is like leading up to that. This is the preface to those moments.
Right. It's you're on the front porch of a dystopia.
Right.
So with most of the people in England at the time that this adventure is happening, they're just going about their regular lives that they always have, and you get glimpses of that when Mark Studdick, one of the protagonists, goes to a little village called Keir Hardie that the bad guys are planning to liquidate. All the people there are just going about their ordinary lives, not assuming that anything bad or nefarious is going on. So it's not Brave New World. It's not 1984. It's not Blade Runner or anything like that. It's just ordinary England. But the bad guys are on the very threshold of introducing a dystopia. And so the battle is this grappling on the edge of the cliff to head off the dystopia. And you can very clearly see what they would introduce if they were successful. But it's not a fait accompli. It's not done.
Yeah. What's so one last kind of preface before we get into some of the themes. The title itself, That Hideous Strength, I understand that comes from a poem about the Tower of Babel. Is that right?
That is correct. There's a Scottish poet who, in the 15 or 1600s, somewhere in that neighborhood, wrote a poem about the Tower of Babel, and says that the shadow of that hideous strength, I think, ran almost 6 miles, something like that. So it's the shadow of the Tower of Babel. That's the reference.
And why is that the key to understanding? I really do think that understanding that reference is the key to understanding this book. I mean, in some ways, this book seems so prophetic, but in other ways, it's almost like he rewrote the Bible story and said, what would it be like if we put the Tower of Babel here? What would that look like in a modern setting? And
right.
And because of that, it seems prophetic.
Yeah, very much so, because outside of Christ, basically what it boils down to is outside of Christ, unbelievers are always trying to get back to the tree of life. They don't want access to the tree of life, excuse me, on gospel terms. They want access to the tree of life on their own terms. They want to Sneevil their way back into the garden. They want to partake of that fruit. And so the flood was brought about. The bad pun is the flood was precipitated by the bad guys trying to reach for eternal life by the sons of God intermarrying with the daughters of men, and
right.
there were Nephilim in those days. What they're trying to do, and then God says, "I will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal." So his days will be 120 years, and I think that's the warning how long it's going to be until the flood.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so God, but it's clear that God is warning them. He's mortal. I'm not going to contend. I'm not going to put up with this because man is mortal. So you see that men are striving for immortality. They're living for centuries before the flood, but that's still mortal.
Right. It's not good enough.
And that's not good enough. They want eternal life, and they want it on their own terms. And then God strikes them and destroys the world with a flood. And after the flood, the same effort happens again on the plains of Shinar with the building of the Tower of Babel. We don't want to spread all over. We want to concentrate our forces here. We want to build a great empire, the empire of man. And God sees what they're doing, and he comes down and confuses their language, which is a little foretaste of what he does in the banquet at Belbury in that hideous strength. All right, so you've got basically unregenerate, ungodly, evil men reaching for the stars, and God intervening by striking their language.
Yeah, and we're jumping back and forth, and I love it because I just finished that section, and it made me think of a question I have, I guess, is why was it that the curse was, the changing of the languages? Why was that so terrible? And or why did that stop all progression? And I realized in reading this book that the culture in the NICE, the bad guys, the guys that are trying to introduce these satanic policies and take over the world and go to heaven on their own terms. When the culture that they had is one of fear and murder and complete distrust. And so, of course, when you have a true crisis, not a man-made crisis, but a true crisis that happens, there's no way you can communicate. There's no way that you can get out of a situation like that, outside of a miracle.
Right. You can't. Everything rests upon manipulation and using words to manipulate, and that's taken away from them. Their one weapon, that of lying, is removed from them.
That's well said. That's exactly, yeah, absolutely. What so let's talk about the two kind of parallel groups that are inside of that hideous strength, the NICE and then the group at St. Anne's. Who were these people, and why were they in such opposition to each other?
Okay, yeah. So you have two armies, if you want to call them that, two forces. The National Institute for Coordinated Experiments is the NICE, and these are the bad guys who are trying to take over the world. And then you have the company at St. Anne's. St. Anne's is a manor house that Ransom, the protagonist of the first two books, has inherited. And he's also inherited an office that he didn't hold in the first two books, and that is the office of the Pendragon. So there's been a secret Arthurian government that has been with England, Britain, down through the centuries. And Ransom is summoned to an old man's house. He's on his deathbed, and he's given the office of Pendragon. So Ransom is in this manor house at St. Anne's, and a company starts to gather around him. And it's a real ragtag little company of people, including an agnostic skeptic, a woman who's a medical doctor, Dr. Dimble and his wife, just a handful of people, and a bear. There's a bear that's there.
Right.
A bear that's there.
Who plays a major role. It's quite...
Yes. And so you've got this motley group at St. Anne's that is the force that's going to stand against this attempt at a global takeover. All right, so those are the two companies. Now, you may be planning to ask about this already, but to peek ahead a little bit, the two protagonists are a newly married couple, married less than a year, Mark and Jane Studdick. Okay, Mark and Jane Studdick. And what happens is Mark Studdick is recruited by the bad guys, and Jane Studdick finds herself connected with the company at St. Anne's. So this unhappily married couple is divided, and they are each respectively in the orbit of the warring companies, the warring parties.
Yeah.
And then to complicate it, neither Mark nor Jane are believers. Neither one are Christian. And Mark has been afflicted his whole life with a ravenous lust to be included. C.S. Lewis wrote an essay one time called The Inner Ring, where he talks about this lust. And this book is sort of a full-length treatment of what that lust to be included does to you.
Yeah.
So Mark always wants to get into the inner circle. He's a professor at the college there at Edgestowe. He wants to get in with the progressive element. Then he wants to get in with the people at Nice. Then when he gets to Nice, he wants to get into the ring at Nice. And so he's being drawn on, enticed by his lust to be included. And his point, he gets converted in the course of the story. And it's telling that because of his lust to be included as his besetting sin, his moment of conversion is when he rebels against all of that.
Right.
All right. So he's in a place called the Objective Room, and they're trying to induct him into their society. And part of the induction is he has to trample on a crucifix, which he refuses to do. So he rebels against that.
By the way, and I love that scene so much. Like,
yes.
It's so well thought through because he's sitting there and he's just, you could tell like part of him just wants to do it and get over with, and then he's just thinks about like, who, wait a sec, this was a real person. He like realizes that even if I don't believe in Jesus, as God and Creator and my Savior, I believe him, that he was a real person, and here's this guy, and I'm supposed to just jump on him for no reason. Like, it's just such this beautiful moment that happens.
It's really beautiful. And then Jane, for her part, her phobia she doesn't want to be taken in. She doesn't want to be absorbed. She doesn't want to submit herself or give herself away or give herself up. That's why she's postponed motherhood and all, So right. She's very prickly and standoffish, and she wants to be with the nice people at St. Anne's, but she doesn't want to join them, right? And her moment of conversion is when she finally submits. So his moment of conversion is when he finally rebels like a man, and her moment of conversion is when she finally submits like a woman.
Right. There's a I lost my train of thought a little bit, but the Jane, it's very interesting to me that she submits not just to the director, the Pendragon, or God. Like, she actually they insist that she submit to her still unbelieving, probably going to go against her ideas husband. There's this whole again the contrast, the mirror image of the two groups are so striking. Where the NICE is using lies and manipulation to keep Mark in. The group at St. Anne's are not pushing her away, lovingly showing her how to comply and how to submit. So why do you think these two people's persons are I think very, very modern. I think I can I said I can relate to Mark. I think a lot of women can relate to Jane today. What is it about modern society that Jane and Mark both find not not in coordination with reality, or why do they realize it's not working for them?
Basically, what brings Mark to his senses is he realizes how lovely normal is, and what Lewis is doing in his other book, The Abolition of Man, is he's describing how relativistic modern and postmodern philosophy doesn't just result in the loss of the Christian faith, it results in the loss of our humanity. Because relativism is a corrosive acid that eats out any container you try to keep it in. Right, so you can't just keep the acids of relativism, and I can come back at any time and be as relativistic as I please. The acids of relativism will eat up absolutely everything, including your ability to be relativistic. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it becomes a circular argument.
Yeah. So the ultimate bad guys, Frost and Wither, who are the honchos at the NICE. He describes when it finally gets to the end of their destruction. He describes how they got there philosophically, all the different schools of thought that they went through, and how they came to at the end not believing that they were human at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is the abolition of man. Right. And
right.
when Mark is being allured or tempted in that direction, it's the inner ring. He's being allured by the temptation to join the inner ring of people who are not really human at all. They've abandoned that. They've given it up. There's no such thing as human anymore.
Right.
And the thing that causes him to revolt and is the normal things like the smell of bacon and eggs and the memory of his wife and normal people doing normal things. He reverts. He defaults back to factory settings. In other words, we are creatures, and we're meant to be creatures. We're meant to live like creatures. We are not these abstract reasoning machines that destroy our ability to think.
Yeah. That is interesting. The reasoning ourselves into oblivion. I mean, it even goes so far as saying that the perfect world would look like the moon with no vegetation, nothing on it.
Yeah, a true hatred of organic life.
Right.
And the thing is amazing. So Lewis postulates that there's a race of beings on the moon. And there's a war, good guys and bad guys, and they're warring. And he explains that the bad guys are having sex with robots, basically, and that's how they conceive their children, because they're so fastidious and so averse to organic life that they won't have normal normal sexual relations.
Right.
Well, I think, okay, so Lewis is writing in the 1940s, for crying out loud. And he's predicting a number of the demented things that people are attempting now with it's just amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. And I even think about the head.
Yes.
And to me, it is so and again, it's a lot. I call 2020, 2021 the years of clarity, because we've really seen, I think, a true divide between people of honest heart and people that are trying to manipulate any situation.
Yes.
And you see this. I think it's funny, the scientists at the NICE, they consider themselves such rational, logical, again, they can reason their way into oblivion, and yet they find themselves literally worshiping a head of a demon. And it's an insane scene to see these quote rational people doing completely insane things.
Right. And Lewis makes the point in The Abolition of Man, again, these books are parallel. He says that scientism and magic were born in the same neighborhood in the same hour. And so chemists and alchemy are twins.
Okay.
And so he says that this, so Lewis is at pains to say he's not against real science, rigorous science, objective science, but he is against the worldview that many people have adopted in the name of science, which you could call scientism. And
Right.
that scientism, he shows in that Hideous Strength, at the end of the day, is indistinguishable from magic. Right?
Yes.
So scientism is at the end of the day devil worship.
The absolute, and that's the thing. It's when you get to the bottom of it, there's always going to be a metaphysical reality that has to be dealt with.
Right.
Whether it's you call them macrobes or angels,
Right.
Or whether or devils, at some point, you get to and I see that and I see that in today's science. You see the things that we're doing with the human genome, and you're seeing things that
Mm-hmm.
the virus or the vaccine for this virus
Right.
and it like we are doing crazy things in the name that gets that, what am I trying to say, undermines the natural sciences and what God has really provided for us to learn what He's done for us.
Right.
And I do appreciate like honest hearts. I think about like people like Brett Weinstein, the Dark Horse, and those guys, who are not Christian, they're atheists, but they're honest scientists who say, wait, there's a real problem in science, and it's us Christians that are saying, well, yeah, we've been saying that,
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. First time.
Right. Let's talk about Merlin. He's a fascinating character. It seems at first he'd be an oddball character, but he absolutely is important. What is Merlin's role in this?
Yeah.
This crazy.
Let's before talking about his role, let's not forget the fact that he's just simply fun.
Right.
Right.
He is.
He enters the story, and it's a wonderful juxtaposition, enabling you to view or note things about 20th century life that would be flabbergasting to someone like Merlin.
Right.
Right. It's a fun exercise. It's a worlds in collision fun exercise, sort of like taking the Apostle Paul on a plane ride,
Yeah.
So there's that element. It's just simply fun.
Oh, when his reaction to to Ransom's quote servants is hilarious. I mean, there's so many funny things about it.
Yes, exactly. Now, when the good guys, when the bad guys at Nice and the good guys are both looking for Merlin, okay, and they both know that he's going to be a key element in whatever is going to happen. But nobody knows why. Neither side knows why. The bad guys think that they are hunting for a wicked magician who will join forces with them and will lend his power to their efforts. That's what they assume. And the good guys assume the same thing. They know that they're to be looking for Merlin, but they're trying to keep Merlin, the bad guy, from joining forces with the bad guys. And then when they find him, or when he finds them, they find out that Merlin is a Christian. And the assumption that he was going to be a wicked magician was ill-founded, and that Merlin was meant to team up with the good guys and reinforce their purposes and their plans. So that's the key role. And so Merlin, and what it boils down to is, because it's a modern story with demons and angels involved in it, And the nice have opened themselves up to demonic influence. The good guys are not permitted to open themselves up to angelic powers in the same way, because as Ransom says to Merlin, back in your day, it was never quite lawful, even in your time. It was kind of dodgy. It was kind of dodgy and walking the line back in Merlin's day. It was still possible to do it back then and be a Christian. It was sort of like polygamy. It was possible, but even there, you were running a risk back then. None of the modern good guys would be in a position to open themselves up to possession by the Oyarsu, the planetary influences. Merlin was, because of his previous traffic, his previous pattern of behavior, he was able to do that and not risk damning his soul as a result. So he's sort of a prime specimen. And if you don't want spoilers, I guess I'm just kind of spoiling this. But,
I think it's okay. I'm hoping that people will there's a lot in there to read, so spoil away.
So Merlin is someone that the bad guys have, with a spaceship, taken when they kidnapped Ransom and took him to Mars in the first book. They sort of broke the seal. In the solar system, there was a deal that the forces of deep heaven would not come down to Earth. And so Earth was under a quarantine. And the bad guys thought that they were guarded or they were in a safe house because of that. But because they took a spaceship up to Mars, they broke the seal, which meant the deal was off, which meant that the good guy angels could come down to Earth. And what they do is they come down and inhabit Merlin, and then and give him all their power. So all their power is now resident in a human being, and then he goes to the banquet at Belbury to be an interpreter for the Merlin that the bad guys thought they found, which was a homeless guy. So they, when Merlin comes back from his sleep, he takes the clothes of a bum and goes to the company at St. Anne's, and the naked bum is found by the bad guys, and they think he's Merlin.
Right.
And so they take him to their headquarters, and he doesn't speak any English. Well, he does, but he won't. And so they keep assuming that he's Merlin. And so the real Merlin comes to serve as an interpreter for the fake Merlin, and from that position wreaks all kinds of havoc on the bad guys.
Yeah, I just imagine Lewis just having a ball writing some of these scenes, and that one in particular at the banquet. I mean, it is fantastic, and I just imagine him like giggling at some of the stuff he's writing. It's so great.
Yeah, it's really is a satisfying scene.
Yeah. I think another character he seems to have fun with is Fairy Hardcastle.
Yes.
Just a unique, crazy, I guess, lady. Who runs the security at night, and she's a whopper. Whoa.
Right. She's a piece of work. Yes. And this is is a sort of a flaming butch lesbian. And again, this is something that Lewis was calling out, prepping us for back in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And that was pretty edgy for him to be writing about that kind of thing back then.
Or her squad of female police officers. I mean,
right.
The whole thing is pretty edgy and not a few decades before his time.
Right.
Yeah. What one of the things about Mark and Jane that I find interesting is Jane what draws her to St. Anne's are these dreams that she's having, and it's very interesting as she makes decisions. She doesn't understand at any point why she's doing the things that she's doing. It's almost like, I don't know why I did this, but I just I told the person to drive me to St. Anne's. And there's a bunch of different places like that where she instinctively moves in that direction without, and would not have made that decision other than, we call it the Spirit of God, I guess. And Mark kind of over intellectualizes his way into nice. It's again, these kind of polar opposite things that you're, these mirrors that you refer to.
Right. That's a good way of describing it. Mark is in the grip of a series of bad arguments that rationalize his lust, and Jane simply wants to be with the nice people and gravitates with the people, the nice, not the NICE people, but the kind people. She just wants to be with the kind people and gravitates toward them, but doesn't want to surrender herself. But she keeps finding herself taking refuge there.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is interesting about that couple is, the NICE are really they're after Mark, but they're after Mark. If I read this correctly, they're after Mark because of Jane, because she's having these visions, and they're worried that she's going to expose them.
Right. Their primary goal is to get Jane because of her abilities with second sight. Basically, she has visions, she has dreams that are actual and real, and so that's their prime goal. We need Jane. Mark is perhaps useful and interesting to them in a secondary way. He is a candidate for them to include in their inner circle to initiate and bring on board. But that's not the main reason they're after them. They want to use Mark to get Jane.
Yeah. What you said you've gone to this book many times. What do you let me just ask you a simple question here. What's the favorite passage, a favorite part that you have that you enjoy in this book?
Man, that's really hard. I probably like the Mark's rebellion in the objective room the best, because he's so pliable all the way through the book, and he finally takes a stand as a man, someone with a backbone, and it's just really good. I love that scene. I love the banquet at Belbury where Jules, the figurehead of the nice, when his language is garbled and he says, "Hey, lot your bull do."
Yes.
I really like that. I really like that scene. Those probably my two most favorite.
Okay. Well, I just had a so one of the this is again why I love Lewis, and I would not put this book in the same exact category as 1984 Brave New World as a dystopian novel, is he does bring great immense hope. And I think if there is one theme to the book, is that God is in charge, and it's more about what team are we going to be on, as opposed to what's going to happen, and having faith in because every single decision that the nice makes, while seems practical and seems like it's going to work, and almost seems inevitable.
Right.
And as I think it was McPhee who says, what did we just do but feed pigs and wait? you know,
and grow
you
some
know,
very, very decent vegetables. We grew some very decent vegetables.
right. But in the end, it was God manifesting or working His will through this whole situation, and that's why I think this book is so important for today, because it can get quite disheartening seeing what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and here in America for ever, and trying to see how God works in and even turning the what seems like practical and inevitable ideas on its head.
Right. And quietly in the background, you see that God's providential working uh, resists successfully what the bad guy, the great, shiny, grandiose plans of the evildoers. They've got this big institute. They've captured all the governments of men, and you've got this. And what is the resistance? The resistance is this obscure company at St. Anne's.
Right.
Some women and a bear, and a handful of people. And one of the great takeaway lessons that I've learned. Well, let me jump to another book for a minute and then come back, because it's the same lesson.
Yeah.
And that is at the end of The Lord of the Rings, when Frodo and Sam are basically crawling up the side of Mount Doom. The whole setup is Sauron is among the mighty of the earth, and he is overthrown basically by a couple of footsore, grimy, wasted, fried hobbits. And he's overthrown. So what they do is glorious. The fact that they even got there close enough to throw the ring into Mount Doom is just amazing. But for Sauron, he thinks that Sauron doesn't understand the nature of good and evil. Because he thinks, well, he suspects and thinks that the ring has come into the possession of his enemies, the good guys, which it has.
Yeah.
But it never occurs to Sauron that could happen and them not use it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. He thinks that they think he thinks that they think about power the same way he does. But the whole book, and some people who are concerned about The Lord of the Rings as having too much magic in it, it's actually a profoundly anti-magic book, because you have this ultimate magical talisman, the Ring of Power, to bind all the rings, and it comes into the possession of the good guys, and instead of them saying, "Hey, white magic after all," instead of them saying that, everybody, the whole book is all about them resisting the urge to use it. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Gandalf refuses the ring. Elrond refuses the ring. Galadriel refuses the ring. Faramir refuses the ring. Boromir doesn't refuse it, and that's his failure. That's his fall. Right.
Yeah.
Everybody on the good guy's side is tempted to use the ring. Frodo fails at the last minute, but resists it the whole time. And so you've got this setup where the good guys don't think about power the way the bad guys think about power. Right? Now jump back to that hideous strength. There's the scene, and I should add this to one of my favorite scenes as well. This is the third, is when Ferry Hardcastle has Mark Steddick tailed going into the college, and there are only 3 people he could have gone to see, and she only has 2 men available to tail those 3 to see where they went, and so there are three men. One of them is Dimble. Dimble is actually really part of the company at St. Anne's, and she says, except that he's a Christian, there's nothing really much against him. The other 2 are Christians and are movers and shakers on the Christian side. And she makes this comment: except that he's a Christian, there's not, except that he's a Christian, he's a real danger and a hazard. But if he weren't a Christian, we could find use for a man like with those talents on our side.
Right.
Right. So it's what you have there is Ferry Hardcastle thinking about power and power dynamics the same way Sauron does, and the obscure little scholar, or Dimble, is actually the threat to their program. He's the actual threat, but they mistakenly leave him alone because they think that the real threats are these two formidable Christians, right? And one of the things I've wanted to do, one of the things I've wanted to learn from this book is don't try to be those kinds of, don't try to be the kind of resistance to the bad guys that the bad guys would like to have on their side.
Oh, that is wise counsel. Well, and we see that, you think about January 6th, we tried to be the bad guys that the bad guys would like to have,
right.
versus the truckers in Canada, those are two ways of going about protesting. One was much more successful than the other.
Right. Because if the January 6th protesters had been in Portland and they'd been leftists and they were burning down a federal building, that would have been okay. Okay.
Right.
But
right.
Basically, when it comes to that kind of protest, the left is way better at it than we are. That's not our game. That's not how we're supposed to do it.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of even the Christmas Story, and I love the aspect of the Christmas Story. In fact, spoiler alert for those who don't. I'm writing a children's book called The Secret Super Soldier Baby. It's about anyway, but it's the idea of Christ. Sneaking behind enemy lines in the form of a baby that that Caesar would have never saw coming to him,
right.
and it's the being able to hide behind, even like you said, Frodo. Like you do not know. It's allowing God to do His work in His own way. That allows us to be successful.
Yes, God's way, God's work needs to be done God's way.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. I want to thank you so much, Doug, for your time with us today. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe give just a 1 or 2 minute reason why people should read this trilogy, and specifically the book That Hideous Strength, from your point of view. Why would this be a great book to read today?
I believe that it's a great book because it will reveal to the thoughtful reader how insightful C.S. Lewis was about a range of issues across the waterfront. And I will say the book starts out kind of slow, right? But it's like taking a roller coaster ride at Six Flags or something. You're ratcheting up the first part and click, 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 click. But it turns into a white knuckle ride.
It sure does.
And so it's a really exciting book in its own right. But it's the kind of book that will really inform you about how the media works, how the bad guys manipulate public opinion, how what their ultimate goals are, what they're after. It's just really prophetic. It does what the best kind of prophetic literature does, which is inform you how to live your life now.
Yeah. That's exactly. I think about the as you're talking, I think about the little term that they don't stop. Don't tell me why you or how you left Edgewood. All these how did the people get, how did God protect the people? And it's all these strange little ways that kept people from the disaster. And it's quite a,
yeah. No, I don't want to hear how you left Edgestone.
Yeah. Right. Right. Because the ant that got sick that left them away, the pipes froze and they decided to leave. Somebody just heard a voice that said, just go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great lesson to us, that we need to learn how to be in tune to that. Even if we don't have second sight like Jane, we all have the ability to have have that still small voice talk to us.
Right. And he ties the book ends in a cataclysm, but it's a satisfying resolution. You don't feel like he hauled in a bunch of angelic helicopters and pulled them down to fix everything. It's a very convulsive ending that feels necessary given everything that went before.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really does. So I would really encourage everybody, read this book. And I'd also encourage people to check out Doug at dougwills.com. We'll put his information in the show notes. Pastor Doug, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my favorite book.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.